So, the final book of J. Robert King's Blood Wars trilogy, Planar Powers, is the comedy of the group, the first being a tragedy, the second being a passion play, and it certainly is the most humorous book of the trilogy, possibly rivaling James Alan Gardner's Fire and Dust, which I have talked about previously. Planar Powers may also be the most inventive book of the trilogy, and by the same token, it's the strangest, or maybe the most postmodern of the books. So, why is this? Why is it strange? Why is it postmodern? Well, for one thing, it does not really have a plot, at least not in any obvious sense. And personally, I found this to be a welcome break after the relentless kind of forward motion of the first two books, where you're getting from one scene to the next scene to the next with this narrative drive. You're getting from battle to battle to battle to climax and all of that. And this book is quite a bit different. And here, maybe let us recall that comedy, according to what King tells us in this book, comedy is a hero using his or her failings to triumph. It is a hero turning weeping into laughing. It is a hero transcending. And the heroes have a lot of failings here, so much so that the title Planar Powers feels ironic. The characters are at their weakest. Arius is a disembodied soul working as a kind of a judge for the Lady of Pain. Lady of Pain is constantly ravaging his memory, taking out words to render judgments on people. Nina is a middle-aged mother and a reformed bitch queen. The diva Phaeton has become an outsider in heaven because of his long association with humans. Leonan, this god that we met in the first book and kind of saw get killed, Leonan is now a 400-foot tall skeleton hiding out in the plains. He's big, but that's pretty much all he's got going for him. We're also introduced to a blind old lady named Claire and an old, basically powerless mage named Zabor. So it's not a very powerful seeming cast of characters. There are also three younger characters. There is Nina's son Aegis, Arius's daughter Tara, and a former guard, unfairly convicted of treason, named Greenwich. None of them have any noteworthy powers, as you might get in a normal fantasy novel. Plot-wise, so there is something of a plot involving Leonan's breastbone, which gets stolen, and a gnome's cursed door, which kind of gets moved around through Sigil. But mainly this is a book about relationships, oddly. There is Leonan's friendship with the old crone Claire, whom Leonan picks up while wandering around the Outlands. There is Arius's friendship with the old mage Zabor, and to some extent Greenwich, both of whom Arius rescues from the Lady of Pain's dungeons. There is Phaeton's friendship with Nina, Aegis, and Tara. And there is Aegis and Tara's budding romance. Or is it Aegis? I think it's Aegis. Greek word. Don't recall the pronunciation anyway. Continuing on. So there's a few action sequences, but aside from the final battle, these don't feel very consequential. Somewhat as in Fire and Dust, we're treated more to the absurdity rather than the majesty of the plains. Perhaps the most powerful item in the novel is Bafo the Gnome's cursed door, which ends up battering or maiming, or even killing anyone who comes into contact with it. Again, there's a kind of humor to this book. Artus's journal also returns, which allows for some amusing portal activity. The two most notable locations in the book, and remember this is a Planescape book, we're exploring the plains here, at least in theory. The two most notable locations are a slipped gear in the lawful neutral plane of Mechanus, and a closet in Arius's cell, which he enlarges into a secret paradise. And it's hard to know what to make of the fact that in this novel, set in D&D's largest setting, filled with an infinity of exotic locales, we spend quite a large chunk of our time wandering around in an old closet. Planar Powers also continues King's use of multiple perspectives and metafictional elements. So especially striking here is Leonin and Claire's journey into Artus's journal in Mechanus when they land on one of the planes of Mechanus. So Leonin and Claire write themselves into the journal, which allows them to adjust elements of syntax and semantics in order to get the slipped gear of Mechanus turning again. In the course of this, Leonin, who is for us a character in this novel, he recreates himself as a character in a book, which is to say that Leonin, the character in a novel, becomes conscious of himself as a character who only exists when read, when someone reads about him. Let me quote a little bit from the book here. So there's a quotation. As preposterous as it sounded, his, Leonin's, arrangement of the metaphor, involving an immortal reader, had reduced his life to words on a page. Because of it, he was now animated merely when hundreds of thousands of copies of the book where he dwelled were printed and crafted and shipped and stocked and shelved and sold and read and trashed by hundreds of thousands of readers in a world he could not even begin to comprehend. So that's an actual passage from the novel. And this recalls the glossary at the beginning of Zeb Cook's The Plain Truth. If you watched that episode, one of the first episodes in this series, in the glossary, written by a character, it acknowledges the world outside the story for which the world of the story is a setting for a game. So there's this strong metafictional element that you see in some other Planescape literature, and you get that very strongly in this book. And although we shouldn't take the titles of these sorts of novels too seriously, since they are often only slightly more relevant to the actual story than the cover art, and I have no idea what this cover for this book has anything to do with anything. So although we shouldn't take the titles too seriously, this sort of maybe backdoor strategy for altering reality may be what is meant by this phrase, planar powers. Other examples of this in the novel are Arius's construction of a world inside his closet, which is hidden from the Lady of Pain, and Aegis wearing pages of Artus's journal as armor. He actually wears journal pages as armor, since the pages are, in fact, portals. So when his attackers get sucked into other dimensions when they try to hit him, basically. These kinds of powers are all about kind of repurposing or jury-rigging or improvising with what is at hand in order to deal with some apparently impossible situation. Leonin, the large skeleton, and a blind old lady are able to realign the cosmic gears that underline the planes. Arius is able to hide for a time from an omniscient being. Aegis and Tara hold off for a time an army. These are, as much as anything, the kinds of powers available on the planes. They get at Zeb Cook's original emphasis when designing Planescape on knowledge rather than might, than brute strength as the key to planar survival. All right, so we've gotten to the end of the trilogy. Maybe some final comments on the trilogy as a whole before we conclude. So, no, it's not great literature, but neither is it empty-headed commercial fluff. I think J. Robert King is a very talented writer in terms of his use of language and in the structural and narrative ideas that he packs into his books. The progression from tragedy to passion play to comedy. This is certainly an interesting organizational idea for a trilogy. I've never seen anyone do that before. Yes, the characters are weak, especially in the first two books, and King's ideas don't always come off as well as they might. I've talked about this before. Probably, the time, limited time to write these books can be a problem with, really developing ideas. And it's unfortunate that King seems to have been limited by the concept of the Blood War. As I've said before, personally, I just don't find the Blood War concept all that gripping. And it's kind of a relief when King abandons it entirely in the third novel. We don't really hear any more about it after the second novel. Are the novels a good representation of the Planescape setting? And here I have maybe mixed feelings, considering we have almost 1,000 pages of text that I've gotten through. we don't really experience that much of the planes. We do get in each book one or more scenes, which would be unlikely to happen in other D&D, Dungeons & Dragons settings. In the first book, I've mentioned the chase through Sigel's Great Foundry and the fall through the Infinite Abyss. In the second book, we have a passion play within a passion play. And then you've got what I've just talked about, these meta-literary effects, and the closet world of planar powers. And you wouldn't be likely to get that in other D&D fiction and many other, fantasy series as well. So at least in this respect, the novels live up to their status as Planescape novels. As a scholar of literature and games and ideas, I found these kinds of bizarre scenes that I've mentioned enough to make the trilogy worth my while. Whether it'll be worth it for other readers, more general readers, this is maybe more doubtful. Anyway, next time we'll move on to what I think is one of the great fantasy novels, which is Troy Denning's Pages of Pain. All right, so look for that. Thanks for listening. Bye.